All right. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We're going to be talking about exploring the art of feminine and masculine leadership to maximize impact, influence, and well-being. And this is an emerging topic that is emerging amongst leaders right now and something that they're exploring. And as a panel, something that we're super passionate about and something that we really want to discuss because we find this to be extremely timely with some of our world events that are happening. So thank you so much for everybody on the team who joined us here at Cooking Culture. We have our amazing team who wanted to participate in this conversation. And then thank you so much for our panelists for joining us today. I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit more about our panelists' backgrounds and their bios. And then we're going to get into some panel questions. We have about 5. And we're going to really have an organic conversation around these questions. And then at the end, we will answer any questions that you may have. So please hold your questions to the end. And at the end, Ehrlich will be prompting and moderating everybody to ask their questions. And then Ehrlich is also going to be keeping us on track in terms of time because we have so many fabulous, great minds on this panel, we may get off track. So before we get into the discussion, I'm going to start off by introducing everybody's backgrounds, and I am going to start with Monique Sullivan. So Monique Sullivan, she's here, she's waving, she's not Sasha like it says on her screen. Thank you so much, Monique, for joining us today. So Monique is someone who has been a profound inspiration in my own life in terms of business and personal development, and she's someone that I really admire and respect as someone who can really oscillate between the masculine and the feminine to really lead. And Monique's background, she was actually previously the director of marketing for Mattel Inc., which is a huge toy company. And she also worked in other marketing campaigns for the post office. And how I met Monique is she, for, was it 25 or 30 years, Monique? For Landmark, how long did you lead for? Oh, yes.
18 years.
18 years. So for 18 years, Monique was a leader of the Wisdom course for Landmark Worldwide, which is a global leadership organization. And they're in countries all over the world. And she really leads people in their personal growth, their leadership journeys, in an effort to make global transformation happen. And Monique is personally really committed to advancing humanity and seeing a world in which humanity really flourishes and thrives. So thank you so much, Monique, for being here today. Yes. And then we have Andrew Gottlieb. And Andrew Gottlieb is a personal friend of mine as well, as is everybody on this panel. And he is also the founder and CEO of No Typical Moments. They're a highly specialized digital marketing agency, and they work with social impact businesses to really advance humanity and move forth the collective consciousness. And they've worked with extraordinary clients such as the New York Times bestselling author Lisa Nichols and the mentor of Mama Gina's School of Womanly Arts. And his organization is also special because they're a for-profit business and they're part of 1% for the planet. And Andrew is also someone who really operates between both places to really drive results and to advance humanity within his organization. And then we have Kathryn Rogers. Kathryn Rogers, she's a friend and we've also worked together previously. And currently she is the founder of Maya Moon Co., which is an amazing fair trade chocolate company. And they also specialize in creating really unique chocolate experiences that you won't find anywhere else. So if you haven't tried her chocolate, I really recommend you go to her website and check out some of her chocolate and her chocolate experiences. And she's really passionate about using food as medicine and really cultivating the best that nature has to offer to really uplift the health of our planet from people, from an environmental perspective and a community perspective. So thank you so much, Melissa, for being here. And or sorry, not Melissa, Kathryn. I was looking at my sheet that said Melissa. So since I said your name, we'll go into your background. We have Melissa, who is the founder and creative director of Literary Legacy, and they specialize in creating memoir pieces for people who have an important story to tell. And then she also works as a creative director and copywriter for a specialized group of clients in purpose-driven businesses. So I don't know if you can tell already, but there's starting to be a theme emerging amongst all our panelists here where they're really passionate about propelling humanity and the planet forward. And she has a wealth of experience in copywriting, honing in on brand messaging, and really catalyzing impact for brands. So thank you so much, Mel, for joining us today. And then we have Justin Ulrich. So Justin Ulrich, I actually met him. He was my Chinese medicine physician, and he's helped me with a lot of my own personal health issues and some of my personal goals as well. And Justin is an amazing Chinese medicine physician. And he studies he's skilled at a variety of modalities, from Chinese medicine to acupuncture to biohacking, to dietary, to shiatsu, martial arts, and Taoism, which is really interesting because Taoism essentially is the exploration and the balance between duality, or the masculine and the feminine. So it's perfect to have him here with this conversation today. And he really specializes in working with clients who have chronic issues, digestive issues, PTSD, anxiety, in addition to life coaching and working with clients to find their life purposes and put them on their spiritual path as well. So thank you so much, Justin, for joining us and being here today. And then we have Dr. Peters. Dr. Peters, him and I met at University of San Diego, which is where I went for my undergrad. And he has a very impressive background. He graduated magna cum laude of Georgetown with a degree in economics and Western philosophy. And then he got into the business world in New York City. And he later changed his career path, and he went to Boston College, where he started studying theology and ministry. And then he finished with his Ph.D. In leadership studies at University of San Diego and spirituality as well. And he has an amazing background of experiences. He's taught in all different things, from global leadership to international management to organizational theory to social entrepreneurship. He is a wealth of information, and so we're absolutely excited to have him here today. And he also sailed around the world on semester at sea, just like me. We have that in common. And then we have Eric Borzino. Eric Borzino is our moderator. And Eric Borzino he's the VP of Corporate Development at Everbridge Corporation, which is a publicly traded company. And Eric was actually a part of a founding team called Cloud4, which got acquired by Everbridge. And he worked with the leadership team at Everbridge to take them public. And now they're a publicly traded company, and they're worth multiple billions of dollars. And so Eric was a main leader in the growth of that business. And he also is responsible for the mergers and acquisitions. So he buys and sells companies. And previous to that, Eric worked in venture capital, and he graduated with a degree of economics at University of Virginia. And then we have me. I'm your host today, and I am pretty sure everyone knows me, but I'll just introduce myself for when we share this video later. So I am the founder and editor-in-chief here at Cooking Culture. I'm also the founder and CEO at Bliss Foods, and previous to Bliss Foods, I ran a multi-award-winning digital marketing agency called Disruptive Marketing here in San Diego. And we had the honor of working with small startup companies all the way to Fortune 500 companies such as Yamaha Corporation. All right, so we have a very impressive panel. So without further ado, we're going to dive into the panel discussion and get into it. So I have 5 questions that I'm going to prompt, and we're just going to organically answer these questions as panelists. Everyone will have a few minutes. Eric's going to come out and give me the warning, and he's going to be our time keeper. So for our first question, I really want to frame this conversation. So for some of you, you may already be familiar in what is feminine, what is masculine leadership. But for those of you who aren't, and for those of you who this is a new conversation, I want to start off by asking the panelists, what is your definition and what are the differences between feminine and masculine leadership? Do you define this by attributes? How do you define this? And why is it important to use both leadership styles? So anyone can kick us off. I'm going to start off.
Jump in.
Yeah, okay.
I throw my hat in the ring and see how this lands for everyone. And maybe I can tell this in more of a story format of how I see this playing out in my own company. And I'll give an actual example of what is happening this week and into next week. So we unexpectedly had 2 people quit. And the person on our team who normally takes on these roles, and when people are leaving, dog died unexpectedly as well. So I'm now taking on a ton of responsibilities to ensure that our team is okay, our clients are okay, and ideally she can attend to her dog and everyone can leave peacefully and transition their workout and start their new company in 2 weeks. So this requires a ton of what I would call masculine energy. For the last 4 days, I've worked anywhere from 12 to 14 hours a day. It requires a lot of let's get stuff moving. We got a direction. We need to go. We don't have time to waste. This is happening now. That's what I would call masculine energy. And in this process, it requires a lot of that type of momentum to get things moving and on pace. At the same time, I would say where kind of the feminine leadership would come to play with this is I get to express a lot of empathy for the people who are leaving. I get to express a lot of care. I get to be empathetic with why they're leaving. And as well, I get to be very enrolling. And I would call that almost more of a feminine trait of people I'm talking to about, is this a good role for you? Being a little bit more caring and considerate of where they're at and the holistic picture of their life. So overall, I'd say the feminine leadership that I'm needing to tap into right now is more of the empathy, the care, and the compassion for the people around me. And the masculine is let's get stuff done. We got a direction. We're going there in 2 weeks. If you like it or not, let's go.
Really clear definitions. Thank you for speaking a bit to the attributes and providing an example. I'm kind of curious to hear from you. Why is it important to oscillate between the two? Why don't you just want to drive, get stuff done all the time?
Because you're going to burn out. So tonight I am going to be watching Captain America. I'm going to be eating chocolate, probably just relaxing, putting on peppermint essential oil all over my body. And so I need to have that balance or I'm going to burn out. And if you're on the flip side if I'm caring too much about everyone's feelings in this process right now, then nothing's going to get done and we're not going to go anywhere.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, let's hear from someone else on our panel.
I'd love to jump in. Thanks, Anne. So look at the difference in the feminine perspective, and we can even kind of go to more of our primal definitions of masculine and feminine expression. So femininity in that kind of gather a lot, in my perspective, to do with a collaborative approach and how we're enrolling multiple perspectives and ourselves, be very communal and cross-oriented, and thinking holistically about the big picture and really taking a team-based co-creative experience. And so that plays out a lot of ways in business. When we do recipe development at my move, focus on being in our creative flow and allowing new ideas to emerge organically and to enroll all of our team members in our kitchen space in the process to really come up with creative and innovative flavor profiles. And the flip side of that, or the counterbalance to that, is more of the masculine approach, which is that really, as Andrew mentioned, that really kind of action-oriented, clear target, goal-specific thing, which is obviously very important. And, you zoom it out and looking at the big picture. So thinking about what we aim to achieve and how we're going to measure our success. And often, as a leader of a company, especially as a founder and CEO, there's importance in the role of holding the vision and setting clear metrics for the team so we can achieve the success that we aim for, and then simultaneously enrolling our collaborative and co-creative capacities to bring that vision to life. So that's how I define it at my own, at least.
Thank you. Very well said. So what I'm hearing is, when you tap into the collaboration, when you tap into that feminine essence of leadership, it really sparks innovation and new ideas that are going to propel your business forward. And tapping into the masculine, you can be very metric oriented. You can measure and you can track your results, and you can be even more effective and more efficient.
Agreed. And I think there's also new opportunities, especially as we're kind of shifting the paradigm in masculine, feminine leadership archetypes and styles, to look at new metrics of success based upon more of a feminine approach. And I think this is an interesting and exciting opportunity because, at least for me, coming out of a corporate and very hierarchical, patriarchal business world prior to launching My Moon, so many of the metrics were, it's like all about SMART goals, right? Which is a very linear, structured, focused approach, which certainly has value. And I also believe that it's very important, especially as we start to think about taking a more holistic view in the world as a whole, to develop new metrics potentially that aren't just based on, objective achievement as this very linear process that has a more masculine orientation, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I feel like it's a perfect segue to Justin, because Kathryn is touching upon how do we take this holistic perspective in the world, and beginning to open up the conversation as why it might be important to define other objectives. And I feel like you have a very holistic approach to what is masculine and feminine. So I'd love to hear from you.
Gladly. I think Andrew and Kathryn both gave a wonderful example of sort of the dance of that duality of what Chinese medicine would call yin and yang, or internalizing and externalizing feminine and masculine. And I think there is just this idea, if we take Andrew's example, where there's a degree of understanding, internalizing, listening, what we might qualify as the feminine, that leads to focused action, masculine. And there's this dance where he is simultaneously being present and being feminine, being yin, in the sense of taking in the information, observing the situation, seeing what needs to be done. And then, because he has done that, yang follows, action follows. And it's always yin before yang. It's always the internalizing before the externalizing within the Taoist paradigm, is that we have to slow down, look, observe, interact, much like Kathryn's example of having the team interaction, where there is this back and forth process of working together, listening, learning, and then action comes from that space. And I think it's that ability to listen before you act. And, we could say that Andrew's actions are masculine, but they're also yin, they're also feminine, in the sense that he's acting in a way to care for other people. It's not just acting for the sake of a metric, it's acting for the sake of humanity, or the humanness of the people that work for him, which is a metric, possibly something that we should include in the metrics of how you run a company, versus just the end dollar sign or the end flow of production or whatever that is. But it's, for me, that would be the duality of yin and yang as a way to to differentiate between understanding before acting.
That's very interesting to hear that, we think of going into that drive mode that Andrew was talking about. That's masculine. But in the context of which Andrew was speaking about, it's actually caring for other people. So that's really cool and interesting to see. And, you're talking about the Chinese medicine Taoist perspective of this duality. Why is it important to kind of maintain the balance? From my understanding, when you don't maintain the balance in Chinese medicine or in Taoism, it's what leads to disease, right?
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, a good way to put it is that too much of either one is out of balance in the sense that you lose the entirety of the whole. And disease, fight, flight, freeze, triggered space that shows up as our shadow, all of that stuff is really just when we are in monovision about reality. There is only this one reality, and there's just nothing in the universe that is like that. Mm-hmm. Everything contains polarity, especially when you have a relationship between two people or two things. You can never have a singularity in that sense. And so if we go too much into masculine or we go too much into feminine, either way, we've kind of lost the plot of what the universe is, and that never works out. Short term, we can certainly do it, and there's times and places to be fully one or the other, but it fundamentally has to be short-lived, because you just look around in the universe, it's just the way everything is.
Yes, and I'll just quickly say my own experience working with Justin on my personal health. I was working with him, especially during a time where I was really operating out of my masculine with my digital marketing agency, driving business forward. And like Andrew said, it burnt me out. I got very sick. I got very exhausted from that. So from a well-being perspective and what Justin's speaking about, it wasn't sustainable to really maintain my health. And in the long run, it made me a very ineffective leader. So there's shortcomings to just operating from one mode. So thank you so much for sharing, Justin. Does anyone else on the panel want to address this question?
Ms. Monique?
Yes.
I'll just add and underscore really from what I heard with the others. One of the things that I see when I use my feminine energy for leadership, it's a lot more asking of questions and listening and empowering. And then when I use my masculine, it's playing in the competition, playing games, being playful. So masculine doesn't only have to be drive, but it's also that humor, playful, and competitive aspect that comes out with that. And I'm now retired, so I have a bit of the perspective of what it started like in the 80s when I started till now, where in the 80s, the drive and the masculine was more expected if you were a leader. And now it's way more accepted to lead from the feminine. Mm-hmm. And lead, whether you're a man or a woman, lead from listening, lead from asking questions, lead for what do you think, and empowering.
Yes, I think it's really important to acknowledge the growth and how far we've come as a society, because even when I started my career 11 or 12 years ago, it was not accepted to lead from your feminine. And that's part of the reason why I went hyper into my masculine. So it's amazing to be a female and to be a leader in this day and age. And not only female, but male as well. There's a lot of pressure on men to operate from a certain mode as well.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to add is in my career as a wisdom course leader, I had teams, 5 people on my teams, and what was really satisfying for me as a human being was I led mostly from being interested in that their lives were flourishing, and very little on the metrics, and we made ridiculous results happen.
Yes.
So you can really be very effective by paying attention to the human being that's in front of you and get, off the chart results. We grew business like no one else had done.
Thank you for saying that, because if you think about the body or an organism, when your body is well and it's flourishing, your health is going to be flourishing, your expression in the world is going to be flourishing, you're going to feel good. And like Monique is saying, the results are naturally going to follow. But if you're imbalanced, if there's a sickness going on in your body, if you're depleted, if you're exhausted, you're not going to have sound judgment. You're probably going to make a lot of mistakes because you're exhausted. You're not going to be as innovative. You're not going to be as organized, and it will hinder your results. So that's really great that you prioritize well-being and you prioritize flourishing, and that it naturally, the results followed. Any of our other panelists want to share before we, okay, Mark?
Thanks, Jessica. This was a really rich dialogue. Thank you for, framing the dialogue this way. Really appreciated Andrew's current example, right? You're living this now, that sort of tension. And Kathryn, I resonate with your idea of that profit and bottom line and results is fairly masculine and needs to be balanced with maybe the people, planet, profit part of an organization. And I love the idea of innovation as being a feminine energy. I haven't thought about it that way. That's really cool. I think there's something to that. And then Justin, the yin and the yang, this goes back to my teenage years when I was fascinated with the martial arts and Eastern philosophy. And I love that idea of sort of internalizing before you externalize. If more leaders could do that, I think we would have much more thoughtful, conscious, and probably more effective leadership. I think of it as like sort of using your prefrontal cortex, right? The reflective piece, which doesn't happen. What happens is instinct, right? And we've had an example last 4 years when all you have is instinct and no reflection. So, there's something new that emerges when you have both of those. And then Monique, what a beautiful summary. I think the masculine idea of healthy competition, right? That playfulness you were talking about, that joking, sometimes, I've worked in very masculine environments in New York City and very feminine in ministry, dominated. And those jokes don't fly. The ones that were, that I used in the corporate world, in fact, it's seen as aggressive, right? So I really think you got that. The other thing I would have to add to this is, I love this idea that the universe itself is one, it's whole. And so I'm teaching a class on the leadership in the new science, and what they're talking about is quantum mechanics. And they're talking about the core part of everything that exists is a vibrating string. And, the sort of Schrodinger's cat, it's like, is it a wave or a particle? Well, it depends. So we have that capability to be both masculine and feminine, and we're actually sort of a kind of this unique merger of both. And so, in the corporate world, that's task versus process. It's achievement and relationship. They're both important. Process as important as the product. But we focus more on, I think we're still pretty patrilineal. We're still pretty much, it's more accepted for feminine energy, but I think it's fair to say that we have some rebalancing to do to bring that feminine energy in to contemporary leadership.
Thank you, Mark. We definitely have to have another conversation about the quantum particles. You're speaking my language there, but you very eloquently summarized what everybody shared. And I think we're going to dive more into, as we progress in the conversation, the balance between masculine and feminine and where do we need to correct. And something I just want to place in the back of our heads, we can address this as we get into some pitfalls at the end, is potentially social media, this instant gratification society, tech, social media doesn't allow for that reflection. So that's something that we can explore as we progress in this conversation. Mel, do you have anything you wanted to add before we move on to the next question?
I really just love what Andrew said about kind of sliding on that spectrum through business. So you're not, just a feminine dominant leader or a masculine dominant leader, but depending on what's going on in your business, what's going on in your life, even in your household, you're kind of swaying. You're going back and forth between what's understanding what's needed in the moment, and intuitively what your business needs, what you need, what your team needs, and kind of just moving on that spectrum where sometimes you're more on the feminine, sometimes you're more on the masculine, and you're really using that intuitive sense to determine when it's needed from you. So I think that that's a really beautiful thing that you said, Andrew, because in a conversation like this, sometimes I get stuck on thinking that I need to permanently move myself more in one direction or another. But I love the idea that you're ever evolving, you're ever moving, and it's always something that's flowing and changing.
Yes, I really like what you have to say there, Mel. And what I am hearing from what you're sharing is that exploring the art of masculine and feminine leadership is a real opportunity to be present. Eckhart Tolle's book about the power of now. Well, this is the power of now. This is an opportunity to really be present, to present yourself to the moment and to the situation and make a judgment call. It's not a strategy. It's not something that's pre-planned out. It's really, exploring what is masculine, what's feminine, and at what time do I oscillate between the two. So it's really a mindfulness practice, which is really interesting. Thank you so much for answering the first question. So now we're going to dive into the second question. We've talked about this concept from a theoretical perspective, but let's go into some real world examples and bring this to life. So where does the balance between feminine and masculine, or the imbalance, show up? And this can either be real world examples that are out there that are happening in society, or examples that you've seen in your own personal life.
I can start off the discussion of where this imbalance happened with an example of our own company. And I liked what Kathryn was saying from a data perspective. So something I realized this fall was the way we were leading our teams were in much more of a feminine leadership position. And what I mean by that is when I would ask someone what is their client KPI goal, most people had no idea what their goal was on the project. There's no data. It was just like, oh, the client feels happy. And that was a huge red flag. And it was something undetected for a while of, okay, how are we operating our business, which is a very data-driven profession in digital marketing, and have no actual goals we're setting for our clients and any data we're shooting for. And that it was what's been talked about is almost this pendulum that sometimes needs to swing. So if we were way too, okay, does everyone just feel happy? I'm pushing us in a much on the other side of the spectrum to be crazy data centric. Like I should be able to Slack you every week and be like, what's your KPI goal? And you should be able to tell me it. And we're reading this great book called Measure What Matters right now. It's about the goal setting process of Google. It's a really, really great goal setting process. And my aim now is we'll tilt the pendulum really far in the extreme of so data centric on our goals that we'll be able to find this balance between the two, because it's not great to exist solely in one of those worlds when you're running an organization.
Yeah, and I think as a leader, it can be challenging. I speak from my own experience where I love data and I love numbers and I love measuring results. My number one strength on Strength Finders is an achiever, so it can be challenging for me, but it's so easy to get lost in like the actual numbers, especially when you're running a data-driven digital marketing agency. So thank you for sharing. Anyone else on the panel want to share an example?
Yeah, I can go next. When you asked the question, what came to mind is one time I was in Los Angeles as a guest speaker for the weekend of the Wisdom course. And I could tell, one of the things is the intangibles that you learn, and that when you trust your feminine, I could tell that the course was missing a critical piece of their development. This was weekend 4. They should have been further along in their development. So I started asking some questions like, how are you doing with your collaging? Collaging is used as a tool to clear the space and create the space, create new realities. And I noticed that most of the course hadn't done it. So there was immediate need for action. So I pulled the team leader and the group of people that care for the participants in the course aside and just empowered them by saying, I know you love these people, I know you know how to put collaging in this space. Please create an opportunity and I'll enroll the couple hundred people in the course that they can participate in this opportunity. And they created, tables and lunches being brought in and everybody collaging. And the participants in the course had extraordinary breakthroughs because that was a piece that they were missing. So it's kind of the dance back and forth between, in my listening, finding something missing, seeing an opening for action, then again through empowerment, empowering people to take the right action. It's also a listening of trust. That's the other thing I kind of see in just thinking about how did that all go about. And everybody was left empowered. The team members really felt powerful about the gap that had been found, that it was, they did something very effective to be of service, which is something that I listened for, that they would want to be of service to I can call them their clients.
Would you say that in tapping into that empowerment, that was more of a creative, like what I hear when you're speaking, where you're speaking to them of what could be the new outcome, the new reality, the new future? Would you say that sense of creation and empowerment would be a feminine leadership skill?
I think so. And also a piece of growth and development in myself. I think earlier in my career, I would have gotten threatened, like, oh no, we missed something. We did something wrong. It's your problem. You did it wrong. Like making the accusation.
Interesting.
And that wasn't there. I could just be I know these people. They love their clients. They want them to succeed. I'm going to listen that piece into existence.
So that's where you're bringing in the balance between feminine and masculine. Maybe the masculine would get so results oriented and focused on the outcome that you go in on the extreme side of it of making people wrong, judging them for not meeting that metric. But when you saw the results wasn't being quite met, you said, this is a real opportunity for me to tap into my feminine and to act from a place of collaboration, creation, and community, and that we really rise by rising each other and uplifting one another.
Yeah, and the power of doing that with your expectations, that they'll rise to the expectations.
The trust.
Like there's something about the listening. Yeah.
Interesting. And the letting go. Well, that as a leader or as anybody in the workplace, that letting go is healing enough. That because when you're so attached and you're so stressed and you're so worried, I could speak from my own experience, it doesn't make you feel very good in your body or your mind. So,
exactly.
Okay, very interesting. Does anyone else want to? Oh, sorry, you were going?
I just wanted to say it's not I'm now going to tap into my masculine. It's just a natural thing. It just it arises.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Justin, I think you said you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm glad to sort of add in on my specialty is more the personal development side versus the running a corporation side, but there's still an overlap of the process we go through. And, as I'm working with a client who is struggling with some sort of chronic emotional trigger or struggle, as well as what they have to do for themselves is the step of being able to acknowledge what it is that's going on and honoring what it is that's going on within themselves. And as I provide a service to them to be a coach or to be a guide, I need to be able to listen. I need to be able to take in what their experience is and honor that that is the experience they're having right now in the present moment. This is the emotion that is showing up. This is the trauma that is showing up, or this is the struggle that is showing up. But then to shift at a certain point where the story that is there has to stop. You have to draw a boundary to that story so that you don't keep running it on repeat, because you can't build a new neural pathway. You can't build a new reality if you keep reliving the old reality. You have to honor that that's there. You have to honor the scar that is there. You have to honor the struggle that is there. But at a certain point, you have to say enough is enough. We now need to take action. We need to come up with a plan. But the plan or the action that is there has to be related to what that struggle is. It has to have some context, some sort of relationship to the struggle so that it can be honored in the person, and you take action that is different for you than it would be for me. Because even though we're both facing a similar struggle, our relationship to that struggle will be different because we're two different people, we're two different souls. And we want to sort of know when to sort of call somebody out and say, okay, I've heard your story enough. Now we need to move into the action phase. We need to stop connecting into this side of your experience, and we need to shift you into the action mode of doing something different and building some new neural pathways, building some new reality or some new memories about life compared to the old memories that you're carrying around and sort of letting haunt you.
Yeah, that's very interesting perspective that you bring up, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really important from my understanding to create new neural pathways because that wards off Alzheimer's and other various diseases in the body, because when you're stuck, not only can it create emotional issues such as PTSD, anxiety, depression, but it also creates calcification on the brain, right? That lead to a whole host of physical and mental issues.
Yeah, psychosclerosis is just as real as arterial sclerosis.
Yes.
Right? It's just hardening of our mind as we become more habituated. And a lot of those habituations are based on trauma or learned behaviors that we're just uncomfortable to step out of. And that's where you see microdosing coming in that sort of sparks some of that. But we can do that through play. Play is a great way to create new neural pathways. And it's when we're stuck in a struggle, we find ourselves struggling with something. One of the most useful things is just to do something entirely different. Even if it fails, it doesn't matter. It's that you just don't repeat the same thing over again in that same sort of way of approaching the problem. Rather than looking for the results, you just look for the newness, because sometimes that new perspective is all that you needed to find the actual solution.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that, because with the wisdom course that I went through that Monique led, they would have do things like brush your teeth with your left hand if you're right-handed for the next 2 weeks. And that creates new neural pathways, and just see what changes. Have you walk differently, walk like a cowboy. We did like all of these crazy things to kind of disrupt our mind, and they seem kind of like mindless and silly, and you're playing and we're cracking up and laughing while we're doing all these things. But literally, like, our life experiences would change after that. So it doesn't have to be something so major to disrupt the pattern. It could be something as, for 1 week, they had us sleep on the other side of the bed. Like, normally where a head goes, flip it the opposite way. Like, just change something up that you're doing in your day-to-day life, and watch how your life experiences and how you feel, and how everything kind of changes.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, I want to dive into the next question. And from the panelists we haven't spoke to yet for this past question, hopefully we can hear from you in this next question. So what I want to hear to further bring this concept to life are some more examples of where you've used the feminine and masculine and the result or the difference that it made. Did it strengthen your company culture? Did it, like Monique was saying, help you create results from ease? So maybe from Kathryn, Mel, and Mark, we can hear a couple more examples.
Yeah, I can start. So I used to run member services for an international fitness company. And when I first started working there, it was a very masculine dominant environment. And I felt this pressure that I needed to step more into that in order to make it, essentially, in that company. And something that I noticed right away, and the company was notorious for this, was extremely high turnover. Like, employees did not last. They'd come in, they'd work for a few weeks, a couple months, like rare to see someone for longer than a year. And, you know, from a data perspective, it takes money to bring somebody on board them, train them, and then, you know, let them go or have them quit to have to just start that over again. And something that I learned through that experience was that I could tap into these more feminine qualities, which were just being a little bit more nurturing with my team, asking them questions, getting to know them, building a relationship with them, and not just seeing them as a means to an end to get results. And by building this relationship and kind of shifting the company culture in this way, people stayed on longer, people were more loyal. And then when we did need, as a team, when we did need to kind of tap into our masculine, you know, get down to business and get things done, people were more invested in the process because they were invested in themselves and the team, and they believed in us. And everything was just much more pleasant when you're working from that space and you know that everyone is, everyone's just happy to be there and wanting to move forward together. So then we can kind of, you know, oscillate between that feminine and masculine together. And when we're having to buckle down and, you know, make phone calls or do whatever it is that we're needing to do, we're in it together. And it's not sort of a push energy. It's more of everyone's being pulled to want to do it together.
Yeah, so really focusing on the relationships and how important that is. And I know Mark and I were having a conversation the other day on the phone about how important that aspect is. And, you know, I want to open up the conversation to Mark, but before I go into that, I can speak quickly to my own personal experience. I used to be all numbers. You know, I used to struggle with the relationship aspect because I was working in a very male dominated world. There was no time for emotions. There was no time for a relationship. It was just, you either had the result or you didn't. And Kathryn probably can acknowledge this. I really struggled with the relational side of things in the beginning, like to the point a couple times I even made women cry working with them because they were like, you're so cold. You're really missing the human side of things. And I was confused in my own head. I'm like, I'm just trying to get this result. I'm just trying to get this done. I didn't even think I was being like that mean. But in my own life, I've had to really learn how important it is to be human-centered and relationship-centered, because at the end of the day, we're human beings and we're existing in this community together. We're existing in these organizations together, and you cannot burn your people out. You can't treat people like objects, because when you do that, it devalues people, it makes them feel bad. You hinder innovation, you hinder growth of an organization, and at the end of the day, you actually are doing the opposite of what you hope to achieve. You're hindering your results. So maybe Mark, you want to speak a bit to the relational aspect of what Mel was saying, and share maybe an experience from your life as well.
Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate the invitation. And yes, Mel sharing, your sharing, and of course, Justin, it's setting me up perfectly for this, as well as Monique. So in my own journey, I've had a professional coach for the past year, and that's actually the first time I've had a professional coach. I've had mentors, you know, what I realized in that coaching was that my entire career has been gradual, but nearly complete shift, perhaps almost too far at this point, of going from being really achievement and task oriented, because that's how I was raised, and went to, I was in the most competitive environments, right? So that's that masculine, you know, that Monique was talking about. That's how you relate. over time, I was in that churn and burn that Mel was talking about, right? They will burn, institutions will burn you out. They are impersonal. They do not care about you because they're not capable of care unless humans like us in leadership make it more humane. And that's, I think, what Mel was talking about, what she was trying to do in her place. So just to keep it brief, because I want to make sure we get to hear from Kathryn, the shift was, I left corporate America, I left sort of the world of investment and banking and finance to go into ministry. That's about as 180 as you get. And I had no idea what the heck I was doing. And my most effective year of ministry was the year when I didn't know a thing, because I just relied on the wisdom of the group that I was there to lead. And that's when my conversion, if you will, to relationship orientation happened. And it really was nestled in love, right? I really loved these people that I was leading. That is, it may sound cliche, it may sound corny, but love, that kind of is fierce when it's like that. And when it has that combination of male and female, we got things done as a group, but we got them done in the right way. And so that's what I have to share about that.
Thank you so much. You really eloquently shared that point. But another theme that, to play off of Monique's, what she was talking about before, I also heard the theme of trust emerging. It's letting go. It's trusting the process. It's trusting the people that you're working with. And that really excites me because, someone who's an A-type personality, the ability to let go can be so regenerative for your health. So I think, that's really important, not to hold on that sense of control, to trust others, to trust the process, and just trust that the results or whatever it is that you're striving for it's going to happen as long as you put your best foot forward. So I appreciate you saying that. Kathryn, did you want to share?
I'd love to. Thanks. This is all very exciting and inspiring. And I was thinking, as Justin and Jessica, you were talking about disrupting patterns and more of like the personal development spectrum, but how there's such an opportunity to disrupt patterns in organizations as well. And so before launching Maya Moon, I worked for 10 years doing brand strategy and leading marketing teams for very patriarchal oriented organizations. And it was my task to come in. And this is why I mentioned earlier that I see innovation in a way tied to a more feminine perspective, because my job was essentially to come in and to rebrand companies. And the process that I used to do that was to listen and to be in the real receptive, co-creative, collaborative perspective, and to hear from the expertise of people at every level in the organization, from line staff to executives, like what the issues were, what the strengths were, which was a arduous and time-consuming but really beneficial process, because probably for the first time for a lot of these organizations that had been operating in the lane of like, we have an agenda and these are the people that get to be at this table and this is how decisions are made, to actually start to have it be inclusive and to bring in a range of perspectives and to recognize the value of the viewpoint of all parts in the holistic, right? So really thinking about this harmonic balance point where all parts of the ecosystem matter. That's where we really started to create meaningful and lasting change. And it was met very often because of the patterning with a lot of concern or pushback, being like, well, how is this ever going to work? Or is this effective? Or are we just wasting time? But the result over time, as we built trust and allowed the process to unfold kind of in its more natural rhythm, was that together we created solutions that were exciting. So there was a new spark in creativity and hope and possibility for a different future in the face of things that really weren't working well in the organizations. And just, I mean, it's hard to measure this, but you could see like a different type of energy because there was inclusivity and people felt that they had value and they could recognize where their experience could actually inform new potential and new possibilities for the organizations. And the best result from that was that we started to interact with our clients and customers in new ways, because with a more multidimensional perspective, we were actually responding to true needs rather than like a very pigeonholed, singular view of what a possible solution was. So it was a long process, and I think this is why it can be hard for organizations to disrupt patterns, because we're used to it and we're like, okay, well, we know that this thing is going to drive that result, and if you zoom out, it can take time, and it's a learning experience, and sometimes we feel pressure that there's not time to do that. But when we allow that fluid, natural unfolding from an inclusive perspective, there's immense benefit, at least in those experiences that I had. And also for more long-term sustainable solutions to bigger picture issues, because you're taking a holistic view on the issue. So.
Thank you, Kathryn. You brought up a couple really key points there that I want to summarize and crystallize. One of them being is looking at everyone as a part of the ecosystem as the whole. So think about it like a car, right? You can't just focus on the wheels and like we only can have the wheels. No, you got to have the gas, you got to have the engine, you got to have the body. All of that makes a car go, and it makes it operational so that you can drive the car. So I think it's really important to think about all of the different moving parts and how you need different perspectives and different people. And NASA astronauts call this the overview effect. They say when they are going up and they're launching in space and suddenly they're above Earth, it creates something called the overview effect. And their problems in their life seem very, very, very different from that perspective. I think, again, this taps into innovation. When you're really focused on solving pressing challenges and problems as a group working on a small project or a large organization, it's really important to have a variety of vantage points or perspectives, different modes of thinking, analytical thinkers, creative thinkers, all different personalities, because you want to see the problem from different angles. This is going to make you more effective as an organization. But I also really liked what you said about listening. And Monique brought this up as well. It's like how you went and you really, really listened. And based on what Justin shared previously, I would say that's a very yin trait from my understanding of like what yin is: listening, taking that time to reflect, to go inward, to take in that information before you act. So I just wanted to summarize those pieces. So I just want to do a quick check-in before we move on. So it's 10 a.m. I want to check in with the panelists. We have two quick questions before we open up for two quick questions, which I'll ask you before we open up questions from the team. Is that okay with everybody's time and schedule? Okay, thank you. All right, so our next question is, all right, this sounds all good and dandy. We got to be operating from both the feminine and masculine, but what are some of the obstacles, pitfalls, or biases that are hindering us from operating from the feminine and masculine? And I'll just start by sharing one thing that I see that's major is the attachment to gender. So what I really am beginning to see is that there's like, even when you hear feminine and masculine, there's like some block, and like I could feel it in my body and my mind that, masculine is for the man and operating from the feminine is from the female. And I think those gender biases can hinder us. Like men, I don't want to operate from my feminine because that's weak. I don't want to be seen as weak. And women, like, I don't want to operate from the masculine because then that destroys my femininity. So I definitely see gender as one of the obstacles to having us operate and oscillate between the two. But I want to open it up to the panel and hear your thoughts.
I can start quickly just because I had a thought that came through, which I think it goes back to what we were talking about, is just in like the repatterning. I think one potential roadblock is just habit, and potentially a lack of awareness, right? It is kind of the madness of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And we are seeing a shift, which excites me, but in a lot of corporations, there's just an inherent bias because it's how we've always done things, and a fear of something new because it's the unknown, and I think that can create bias. I would also offer that I agree with you, Jessica, that there is a gendered bias as well. And I don't know if it's so important. I mean, for the topic of this conversation, it obviously is like a clear title to talk about masculine and feminine, but I think it can also be expressed in the practice or the attributes that inform the different approaches or the variance in the spectrum, right? So if we talk about listening or empathy or results orientation or achievement, right? These are terms that apply across the spectrum and I think are much more digestible for people irrespective of gender. So perhaps there's an opportunity to frame the conversation in the practice more so than in the theoretical terms that define the practice, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes total sense. So when you come up with a name for this practice, let us know, because I like where you're going with this, and I think that
we'll call it harmonic balance. Or I don't know, but it is about that coming to the middle is how I would look at it.
Yes, absolutely. And really honoring that yin and that yang, that, that cool graph that you have, the circle with the white and the black on it and the dots on each side. Mel, you were bringing up some interesting points the other day as what do you see some of the obstacles in society and how our society is like really not designed to honor feminine leadership.
Yeah, it's just kind of going back to the initial feelings that I had when I was working at the corporation I mentioned earlier. I feel like when there's so much prominent masculinity in corporations or at the top, I guess, it can be hard to think that there's a seat at the table for something different, something that's a little bit more on the other side. And I think that in the conversation that we were having last week, something that I noticed was that I see that some women in leadership will shift more towards their masculine in order to kind of make a space for themselves. And, whether they're naturally that way or, they're creating themselves to be that way in order to get to where they want to be. I think that's an issue that I see in our society is this expression of feminine leadership, sometimes not quite having a seat at the table because it's so heavily masculine. So I think is that what you were talking about for our last conversation?
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know how, I'm sure in certain fields this is very prevalent, but I remember I was not, I was berated by men if I showed any sort of emotion in any meeting. Mm-hmm. So early in my career, and I learned to be very tough, to show no emotion, to not use fluff, to not talk with fluff, not to talk in human-centric terms, just talk about the bottom line and the results, because that's all that matters. And I think, you're kind of reminding me to some parts of the conversation that we explored is that kind of changing our definitions of success, changing the objectives that we measure and creating more awareness there is it's a need. And it's also a pitfall right now, what are current ways that we define success and maybe some of the metrics that we're using right now in organizations. Does anyone else from the panel want to jump in on that question?
Oh, glad to.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's interesting, maybe an optimist by nature. In this question, I keep thinking of examples of the ground we've taken. And we might not call it masculine or feminine energy in the business, but the coaching style of mentoring, the coaching style of managing is very accepted in very bottom line driven businesses. Mattel is certainly a very bottom line driven business. It was very accepted to spend money on team building and so morale building. So I do think it's become part of the corporate world. Now, of course, there's always a bottom line, but the more we can discover that the bottom line is not created by drive only, it's the balance that it naturally comes up to the fore. And then in politics, I'm just very pleased to see all the female leaders that have shown up over the last 4 years from both parties. And around the world, there's a lot more female leaders that are admired around the world for how they lead in health crises like with COVID. So I don't know. I just see the optimism instead of the all the biases against it.
Thank you so much for sharing. You're creating a new future for us to step into. I appreciate it. Justin, you were going to share?
Yeah, there are a couple things that came to my mind around that. I think one is that in a position as a leader, one of your most important jobs is to unravel your own limitations, your own judgments. And so when you catch yourself reacting to a situation and saying it would be bad for me to be masculine or it would be bad for me to be feminine, to pause right there and to begin asking what sort of programming is there telling you this is bad? What judgment is there telling you this is bad so that you can unravel that? Because if you're a woman going through a patriarchal, male-dominated boardroom and you come in with the baggage of thinking being feminine is bad, you won't be able to be masculine about your femininity. You won't be able to stand in that femininity with strength and say, no, these emotional things, this component of the picture is actually really important. And that is that harmonization of what I would call yin and yang. But you can only do that when you resolve the inner struggle within you. It's really not about the boardroom changing. It's about you changing so that you step into that in your full power and not being afraid of being judged because somebody else's judgment is not really a reflection of you. Your piece has to come from within. And to circle back to your original question, I'm actually not even that much of a fan of the masculine-feminine polarity discussion because I think it does play off some of the struggles between the sexes. And I think we can come up with another language for it that helps to avoid some of repeating cycles that we have. This is feminine or that is masculine. Obviously, my perspective is from the Chinese medicine side or the Taoist side, so I would go with the 5 elements, which is just another way to frame metrics. Wood being very vision and goal-oriented, fire being very passion and excitement-oriented, earth being very nurturing and gathering-oriented, metal being refining of process and structure and that side of thing, and water being more the creativity and flow of things. And I think if we are able to look at management from the metrics of not just masculine, feminine, but of all of those different things, whether it's 5 or 10 or whatever, we can move away from the polarity of it being a masculine or feminine thing. It's just like, these are important to running a company. These are important to being a leader.
I love that. The 5 elements of leadership. I think we've got our next panel and exploring each one of those. I love coming at it from that holistic perspective, wood, metal, fire. I never thought about it in that way. So I think our new name is the 5 elements of leadership.
And they all show up as various facets of shadow. Of triggers in people. We're too goal driven. We're too excitable. We're too caught in process and refinement. We're too caught in this or we're too caught in that. And if they're out of balance, they're out of balance.
Yeah, very.
It doesn't work so smoothly.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. Mark or Andrew, did you want to share before we move on to our last and final question?
Sure. I was going to share, and I really liked what I've been hearing, and I'll share from the perspective of a man and how important it is to be self-reflective of where our programming comes from. And Mark, I interned on Wall Street. I thought that was going to be my path. It didn't last outside of my internship. So fortunately, and even for someone, in 2019, I spent about 800 hours in this leadership training program in San Diego that's very about masculine and feminine leadership. A lot of this programming and fears of a man and not wanting to be too feminine because it equates to weakness and you're not going to be taken seriously. So even yesterday I was watching a podcast interview, Joe Rogan podcast. He was on with The Undertaker. If any of you guys are WWE fans growing up, and The Undertaker was talking about how he broke his neck and didn't even know he broke his neck until another injury arose. And I couldn't help myself, but even hearing him talk about that, I was like, wow, that's so cool. And then I'd catch myself be like, wait, that's not cool. He had a broken neck and he was still wrestling and traveling 5 out of the 7 days of the week. And so my point is, for men, I think it's so important for us to just be in this space of reflection and understand that programming and how deep it can really run, and how it's 2021, and being an athlete, being whatever, with a broken neck and still performing, that's not success in the year 2021.
Yes, Andrew. And I love how you brought in the example of The Undertaker. It's interesting, the commonalities the men on our panel have. Eric loves The Undertaker. He loves wrestling. Background in martial arts, much like Mark. Justin, Andrew, you have a background in martial arts? Did you explore that?
I've had 10,000 hours of watching WWE, if that counts.
Yeah. So you and Eric both. And then what's also interesting is Eric, Andrew, Mark, backgrounds, New York, Wall Street, the economic route of things. And then also Eric went to UVA, and Mark and I technically went to UVA through semester at sea. So some interesting commonalities. All right, great. Does anybody else want to share before we hit our final question? All right, Mark.
Jess, can I just real quickly, I mean, this is so rich, and I'm so glad we're recording it. And I'm resonating with almost everything you say, but in the interest of time, I won't reflect back on all that. I want to reflect some of my colleagues that aren't here. So I asked a few of my trusted, my brain trust, some female colleagues, actually, what do you think about all this? And they hate the gendered language. Now, this isn't their, this is what I heard them say. That gender roles are more constricting than liberating at times because they're taken to the extreme. And Justin's constant reminder of balance, we're all sort of hitting on that theme of balance. So let me just use maybe a fun example. So my wife's trying to get me into Bridgerton. And this is a great example of male energy. I watched the first 5 minutes and I'm like, I'm out. I got no interest in it, but she kept me there for 40 minutes. And here's the example, right? If you haven't seen Bridgerton, this is just episode 1. So there's this paternalistic, and I use that word pointedly, older brother. The father's died. Forgive me for those that don't know, but I need to say. And so this young woman is going to this cotillions. And so Danielle turns to me and says, are these arranged marriages? And I thought about it. I said, actually, they are. This is the West version of arranged marriages. And women are treated as commodities, right? So there's an endowment. And then there's a sort of, and then the prestige is whether the queen sort of, so anyway, it's not an endorsement one way or the other for Bridgerton. But this idea that these have been with us a long time. And I love Monique's perspective that we've come a long way. But I would also say that culture is so powerful. I don't mean just the overarching culture. I mean the institutions culture. So this idea that culture eats strategy for lunch every day. You could have the best intentions, but it takes time and energy and patience, persistence to show up as yourself. To not let those self-defeating scripts of, I'm a woman, this is my place. You don't have to become a man or to always channel masculine energy. Sometimes it's appropriate, right? In order to be successful in an organization. And if you do, that organization is doomed to failure. So you probably need to check out anyway. So that whole idea of Andrew saying, that doesn't fly in 2021. So there's a hopeful sign. But we're still very much in that liminal state, that transitional state.
Yeah, and you came full circle to your previous point, love. Love conquers all. Having the courage to love yourself, to move beyond those self-limiting beliefs, those criticisms, and having the ability to love one another and to connect from a human to human perspective. So I mean, really, love is the answer to everything, like the Beatles sang about and some of the great philosophers of our time. So all you need is love. I love it. Thank you. Okay, so lastly, I just want to, if there's any closing words, anything else that you'd like to say about how organizations or people can explore what we're calling now the 5 elements of leadership in their life, and to really maintain the balance between the 2 attributes. If there's any last closing words before we open it up to questions.
One of the things I want to underscore is the power of self-reflection and the power of knowing yourself. Because when you know your own shadows, when you know your own shortcomings or your own things that you try to hide from the world, and you can own them, you have a freedom to just be yourself. And in that, the natural balance is expressed. So yeah, the really powerful work as a leader to know yourself well and to own who you are, the best and the worst of you. Just own it. Be responsible for it. How powerful that is to be fully expressed. The 5 elements.
Yeah, thank you so much, Monique. I appreciate it. Kathryn?
Yeah, I completely agree. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you. And also, I think the opportunity to have circles like this or spaces where we can reflect and have that mirroring of self and of others, and to practice what the 5 elements of leadership looks like in true form, and to talk about it and to co-create. So thank you for creating a space for us to gather here and to start a very exciting and expansive conversation for all the perspectives shared, because this is also the path forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think awareness, what you're saying, is huge. Awareness shines the light. It's like in a dark room, it's opening up, it's shining a light, and the dark comes over to the light when you bring it out, you speak to it, you own yourself, like Monique is talking about, like what Kathryn's talking about, and you just have conversations. That's the central point and the beginning point of true transformation. So thank you for sharing that. Justin.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Monique said in terms of that perspective of personal development and looking at your own shadow, because one, it's just an important process. But separate from that, I think, is that as we go through the process of sitting with our own demons and coming to terms with that part of ourselves, we develop compassion for ourselves. So hence we can also be compassionate to our people that we are supposed to be leading. We can understand their humanity because we understand our own. And once we have sat with our deeper fears and our deeper demons, we can also hear criticism much more easily. It's not going to trigger those wounds that are unresolved within us. So we can be a more effective leader in the sense of being able to be open-minded to hearing criticism about ourselves or about our organization. And we can be compassionate to people that are struggling, because we understand, like, being human is not an easy job. We all bang our head against the wall and wonder why our head hurts over and over and over again. So I think that side of compassion is really important.
Yeah, and that's stepping beyond the make wrong, which Monique touched upon before, you touched upon it before, but the make wrong, when you make something wrong, it's extremely, extremely limiting. There's no space to create something new as long as you're attached to naming the situation, judging it, and making it wrong.
Yeah.
Mark or Andrew or Mel, do you want to say any closing words?
I can share what's been supportive for me. I would say developing humble confidence is really important. And for me, putting myself in situations that humble me has that arrogance that I think some young, like machismo young men can have. It lessens it. So I did do a little Muay Thai for about 2 years. The first time you get punched in the face, like It definitely is a humbling experience doing ice fasts. Last year, I didn't train for a half marathon and just showed up day of to run it. And that's been really supportive for me, putting myself in humbling experiences that show me how human I am. And I think that allows me to develop empathy for other people and their circumstances and what they may be going through, so I can be that positive motivation and force for them to break through to the other side.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's super key. And for me in my life, something that really humbles me, and maybe other people can relate to this, is learning about the cosmos and quantum physics, or even just going camping and staring at the stars, right? It makes you feel so small. And in that, I feel like a lot of the shadow stuff begins to transform. So think about and reflect in your own life what can bring you to a place of humility. Watching documentaries, there's so many ways we can access that and experience it. Mark or Mel, do you want to say any closing words? Mark?
Sure. Again, just so rich. And thank you, Jessica, for your encouragement to, you don't have to work hard to find things to humble yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Not humiliate, but to humble you, or just put it in perspective. And so, I think developing that humble confidence is great. Justin, looking at the shadow, Jung said the shadow is 90% gold, right? But we need to know how to engage it. And this, Kathryn, finding space for practice, that's all the leadership PhD was practice. And if you didn't continue it, you pretty much didn't get your money's worth, right? And I think that's a lot of what Monique does. And then Monique, I have to show you this, and for the rest of you, that woman on my wall is the Delphic Oracle, arguably the most powerful woman in the ancient world. And her mantra was, know thyself. Mm. It is a spooky, you got to read about the Delphic Oracle, just wiki her. It's crazy stuff. And so this is my last. We have a nearly 5-year-old daughter, and I married the strongest woman you could think of. She played rugby in college, right? My mom was typically a mom, like saintly feminine, but not a lot of the strength there. And so I married somebody with strength. So we are raising a strong daughter, not aggressive, but assertive. And I think this world needs strong women, more strong women to balance it out. And so please be strong women. And men, we need more men who are gentle men, not a gentleman like the old time, but truly a gentleman, because gentleness is strength. Mm. And I think if we do that, we're going to have just a much more humane world.
Yes, I love it. You said it so perfectly. And it really comes back to the theme of own it. Be yourself. Own yourself. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. And even in this conversation, I'm getting so much freedom around just being myself. And it's okay to have your shadows. It's okay to be with your flaws, because if you're saying 90% of it is your shadow, and to really know yourself, it creates a lot of freedom and then openness to want to really explore myself. So thank you so much for that sense of freedom that you're creating with your communication. Mel, is there anything else that you want to say in closing?
I just jotted down the 5 elements of leadership because I love moving it away from male, female, masculine, feminine, and just I think I can speak for myself in that sometimes thinking about it too much does allow for these sort of thoughts to come in of like good, bad, right, wrong, because you're talking about duality, masculine, feminine. So it almost kind of seems to come with the territory to kind of slot things in different categories, and to have these 5 categories, these 5 elements, or however many categories. I think you said like 5 or 10. We can break it down however, but and taking it away from it just being 2, I think really opens up the door for to look at this in just a completely different way that takes away from the duality that can kind of trap you a little bit into thinking just in 2 different ways.
Yeah, so beautifully said, and a perfect summary of what we talked about today. And I like this picture of the 5 elements. You know, it's like a beautiful buffet and you got 5 plates or 5 dishes. It's really, it piques curiosity and like the desire to taste different things. You're like, ooh, I want a little bit of this and I want a little bit of that. And you want to dip your toe in each of the areas between like, oh, am I masculine? Am I feminine? Am I overthinking it? So I really like how the 5 elements of leadership emerge from this conversation. So I want to thank each and every one of our panelists for being here today. We are going to open up for questions from the team. I do want to prioritize questions from Carol and AK because they're tuning in from India, so it's late into the night from them and for them, and Jennifer as well because she's in Ireland. So if we can start off with Carol and AK if you have any questions. If you don't, that's okay as well.
I would just like to say that this was a very enriching discussion, especially in the beginning. I somehow felt that it was the whole idea of masculine and feminine leadership was very categorized in binaries. But as we moved on and we came up with the 5 elements of leadership, I felt it sort of focused by and it allowed for a more inclusive approach into leadership, which I felt was really, really nice.
Thank you so much, Carol. I appreciate you saying that.
I agree with Carol. It was, initially it felt a little stereotypical with the feminine being more emotional and communal and the masculine being the one getting it done. But as we progressed with the discussion, I think it really got down to how it can't really be categorized into 2. It is a buffet, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yes. It's a very delicious buffet at that. Okay, Kathryn, Andrew just hopped off, so he has a 10:30, and Kathryn also has a 10:30. So bye-bye, Kathryn. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, Jennifer, I don't know if you had a question.
I don't have a question, but I do want to say thank you. It's been very informative, and I just love seeing and hearing the different and refreshing perspectives each of you had to offer. So thank you. I'm really inspired now.
Aw, thank you so much, Jennifer. Appreciate it. Does anyone on the team have something to say or a question that you may have? We're going to just open it up now.
I have a question. My name is Cambria, and as someone who personally has operated an habitual masculine leadership style without even knowing it, what are some actionable questions or steps that we can take as young leaders to try and tap into the other side of leadership?
Yes, Monique.
Well, rather than thinking that you have the answer, which is something anyways, as a young leader, you think you have to have the answer, is ask questions. And rather saying, go do this, is what do you think we should do next? And why do you think we should do that? And what else do you think? So kind of constrain your own telling and ask more questions.
I'll just expand on that. I use the exact same questions with people on personal work, is what and why. What are you thinking? What are you believing? And why are you believing it? What story is in the background? What programming is in the background? And just taking the time to have that practice of questioning yourself with honest curiosity, with a kind curiosity, is really helpful to make sure you don't fall in any one pattern too often.
The disruption.
And I'll speak as the other guy on the panel at the moment. I found visualization very helpful. So Marcus Aurelius is a Stoic Roman emperor, one of the good emperors, and he used to journal every morning. What guy, no less emperor, journals in the morning? His meditations are a classic now. So if you do it via journaling, or you just lie and picture the day, and what would it look like for you to show up your whole self? not the self you were enculturated to be, not the self the culture, the organizational culture is demanding you become, but who you are in your wholeness, in your fullness. And then I think it'll naturally come out. You'll bust out of those binaries that Carol and Adit were telling us that it's too small for us, too small.
Yeah, I think visualization is huge. It's beautiful. I'm writing notes for myself. I'm like, gotta practice these things. Anyone else from the panel want to address Cambria's question before we move on to the next question? Okay, so anyone else on the team have any questions or want to say anything? Very good question, Cambria. And actually, I'll just quickly say this whole panel discussion stemmed from a conversation that Cambria and I were having. So thanks, Cambria, for being the catalyst.
Yeah, I have a question too. So because we know that every organization have different culture, and then what would you suggest to the young professionals when they get into the company and then they realize that they have a different leadership style from the organization? So what should they do?
Can I jump in on this one quickly? Mm-hmm. So Tiffany, this is like, my coaching practice is like purpose coaching. And one of the biggest thing is aligning your values, your sense of purpose, your evolving sense of what your mission is in life. If there's not enough alignment, we'll never be perfect. If there's not enough alignment, you need to find better alignment in another organization. Or if it's close to alignment and you really believe in this organization, then you can work to transform the culture, but that's going to be long, adaptive work. And the third thing I say is carve out your own. Make your own space in the world.
Yeah, I agree with Mark. And, Mattel was a very masculine dominated area, and I carved out my own niche. I created a separate company within Mattel that gave me a little island to function on. But then I went over to becoming a wisdom course leader, and that's fully coming from love, and my heart, my soul was best expressed in that area. So I did survive in Mattel, but the thriving happened when I was fully able to be myself.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Mel.
That's exactly what happened with me. I was able to carve out, my own sort of little subculture within a large organization. But after some time, like you said, Monique, to fully express and fully do what I wanted to and make a greater impact, it needed to be something that I did on my own.
Yeah, that alignment I think it's really crucial for our health, for our well-being, and for us thriving in the world. Does anyone else on the team have any questions or want to say anything?
I have a comment. Oh, you can go ahead. Okay. Thank you all for speaking. It's been really insightful. My first comment that I wrote in my notes is it may be more productive not to speak about this as masculine and feminine. And obviously we addressed that. That's a big thing for me. I went to a traditionally women's college, so no cis men at the college, which allowed for a great environment for, self-development. And I found it really empowering where there wasn't that strict binaries in how we all function. So I found that I really found a balance in myself, and I definitely, felt the most myself that I have ever felt without having to be one thing or all of that. So, so thank you for all acknowledging that. Also, I wanted to say, when we set this up as masculine, I was initially shut off by that. And I am more drawn, I'm a creative, so I'm more drawn to these things that aren't traditionally masculine, I suppose. I'm just wondering, how do I, develop the confidence to set myself up for a career where I can still remain, compassionate and empathetic and all those things that I really value while reaching, I guess, traditional success.
Well, Josie, thank you so much for sharing what you shared. And again, just affirming for us that I think one of the things we need to do as part of a, as a panel, and perhaps some of you want to help us, we need to write a position paper on this, and sort of breaking out of the gender, so we can share this a little more broadly, or maybe, of course, this video is one step towards it. But forgive me for repeating myself, but I want to echo what Mel and Monique said far more powerfully and more articulately than I could, that the way you thrive in life, and I always distinguish between surviving, which is what I did in the corporate world, and thriving. I believe it's a journey. I believe it takes time. And I believe it's trial and error. I think you need to experiment. I think you can do some really smart investigation. There are websites like Open Door, and then your own informational interviewing, if you're to interview with an organization. But in the end, I wouldn't be surprised if what you have is something really fulfilling as a side hustle, which I have now, and carve out a niche within an organization. Find that island where you can contribute the most, sort of like Mel and Monique did. I think those are great paths, but there are other paths that we haven't, and you're gonna have to come back and tell us how you did it, right? But that you can do it, and that maybe here's one practical piece of advice. If you're going to carve out your own side hustle, unless you're really, 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 really not risk averse, you probably want to start at a 10% entrepreneur and then slowly build up as you test out your concepts and prototype. And Jessica is one of those courageous ones that goes all in. So there's lots of different types of entrepreneurs, and so I teach social entrepreneurship. One way is sort of testing the waters. That's something. So don't go binary on anything. Right? There's always a spectrum. So you can a great way to start is volunteering. Mm-hmm. You can volunteer in an area where you think you might find more life. And then you can find ways to monetize it later. All right, sorry, I took up too much.
No, it's okay. But that's a very good point. And that's one of our themes this quarter at Cooking Culture. I have everyone, and I've opened up for them to dip their toe into different areas, because one of the themes that hopefully we're going to circle around to by the end of the quarter is really operating from your zone of genius. And this is something that I've started to speak to them about. But the only way you can get to your zone of genius is by trial and error, what Mark is saying, and trying on these different areas. That's why I'm just opening it up to the team at Cooking Culture, anything that you want to experiment with or get involved. So I think just like he said, trial and error, dipping your toe in. And not only will you be able to see and feel what do you feel most lit up or passionate about, where do you feel like you're thriving versus surviving, we all know. And I think there's a difference. Sometimes you have to do things that aren't always easy, but they're on your path to thriving. But also, like, it's something when I'm coaching and managing talent that I can see certain areas which people are thriving, because it's very clear when someone comes to life when they're working on something versus when they're dragging their heels and they're hating it. So that is something that I'm working on, supporting all of you with that Cooking Culture. So let's keep exploring that together. Does anyone else on the panel want to say anything to Josie's question before we move on to Emily?
I wanted to mention, and this is to Tiffany's question as well. I know that the path that Monique and I took was, we worked at an organization, we created our little bubble, but then ultimately left and did something else. But I think that as the world awakens to the different types of leadership styles and recognizes the importance of these different 5 elements of leadership, to stray away from the masculine feminine thing, I think that it's going to be much easier to find. I think it is now, compared to when I entered the workforce, and it will be easier moving into the future to find companies that are led by people that are balanced in their approach in leadership. And it's going to be easier to find your place within companies like that. And potentially thrive, maybe not as an entrepreneur, but as an intrapreneur. And maybe that could be, maybe that's a path, instead of, thinking entrepreneurship as being a necessary part of the journey if you really want to be fully expressed as a leader. I think it's going to be more, I think it is, and it's going to become more possible to really fully express in that way within the right organizations as well.
Yes. Thank you so much for saying that. And I think like what you're touching upon, leadership doesn't mean you own your own business. Leadership doesn't mean that you're like out there being vocal. There's ways to tap into your leadership, being an entrepreneur, being introverted, right? Leadership doesn't just look one way. So that's,
and I can't remember who it was that was talking about this, but having that alignment with culture, with values, and finding the organization that matches with you on that deeper level, because then you've got that foundational base to work on and really invest in when you do plug in.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And just real quick, with my career in digital marketing, on paper, we had some extraordinary clients, but at the end of the day, it was not, for me, an alignment perspective. Not everyone was social impact oriented, and that was extremely draining on me as a person, because I'm deeply passionate about the environment. I'm deeply passionate about humanity and working with organizations that are so bottom line focused that will destroy the planet to meet their objectives. That was soul crushing for me at the end of the day. So really reflecting on what it is your values are and what you value in life, I think is really key to finding that alignment. So thank you for saying that, Mel. Emmy? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to quickly say thank you also. I feel like this was so valuable to have all these different perspectives, and I've already learned so much. I think this is more of a comment than a question, but kind of going back to what Jessica and Justin were talking about with doing different things in the day that sparks these new neural pathways. I noticed that the other day. This past week, I was getting like super anxious. Whenever I do, I like throw myself into work, and I do creative work, which is like you don't want to go into work being anxious, because then it's like, it's not really coming from the creativity. And talking about the book that we were talking about yesterday, Jessica, the Conscious Creativity, one of the exercises was to watch a piece of ice melt, which seems like so random. And I started doing it. I was like, why am I doing this? I should be working. And I did it, and I watched it fully melt. And all the things I noticed, like the little bubbles coming out, it made me think of like the time I was in Iceland, and there was little air bubbles that had been there for thousands of years. And I could literally visualize the neural pathways changing and sparking new creativity. So I just want to say I really appreciate you guys talking about that. I think that's really interesting.
That's so cool. I love that. Like I'm kind of like you, where I personally have that experience. Like I could feel a new synaptic connection happening in my brain. It's like fireworks. It's amazing. Yes, Justin.
Yeah. So one of to kind of tie that back into the Taoist view of yin and yang, in chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching, they say, ever seeing good and bad, you miss the Tao. And it's basically like, if we get into tunnel vision around something, we become sclerotic in our thinking, we become hardened in our thinking, and we lose the capacity to see the other side of something. And so often what I will do is, for myself and with my clients as well, is ask them to see, well, what is the good in the bad that you're experiencing, or what is the bad in the good that you're doing, so that you're just constantly trying to train yourself to go between dualities so that you don't fall into a singularity. And what that ends up doing is you see that there is good and bad in everything, and then it allows you to sort of fine-tune your focus so that you don't become too singular in your actions or your thoughts. And I think that capacity to see the bad in the good, or the good in the bad, the humanity within the person that is triggering you, is just, it's critical if you're going to be in the space of leadership, or even navigate within a company whose culture you may not agree with, to see the good within that culture that you disagree with, to see that it's not so polarized that this company's culture is bad. It's not. It may be out of balance and it may not be in resonance with you, but that doesn't make it bad. Likewise, if you're in resonance with it, doesn't make it good. It just is resonance. And it's good that we can see the strength of our weaknesses and the weaknesses of our strength in that way.
Yeah, and I think even outside of organizations, just to be a human thriving in this world, there's a lot of polarity going on, especially in the United States. So it's really interesting to kind of noodle on these thoughts and have this sort of awareness, because there's quite a bit of polarity, if we look around politically, especially in terms of what's happening. So I think these are skills for just everyday life and things that we can carry out in our everyday lives. Any other questions, comments for the panelists? Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much for participating. Huge round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really thrilled that we even got this new definition out of this conversation. That was an unexpected result, the 5 elements of leadership, because when I was coming up with the title, it felt weird to me, like what Josie was saying. So I really like the 5 elements of leadership, and I think it's something that we can continue explore in creative ways later on. So thank you everyone so much from the bottom of our hearts for volunteering your time and in taking time to really explore this with us and to enrich our lives. Thank you everybody so much.
Thank you for creating it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure. All right. I hope everybody has a fabulous Friday. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.